Egun on guztioi, eskerrik asko Prentsaurreko honetara etortzeagatik. Ondoan ditut Xabier Arakistain, egun on, gaur aurkezten dugun erakusketako komisarioa. Eta Margaret Harrison, good morning, Margaret.
Good morning.
Artista konbidatua eta proiektu honetako protagonista ez da baizina. Muchísimas gracias por venir aquí hoy todos. Me acompañan Xavier y Margaret. Gracias por estar aquí con nosotros. Ahora, sorry, parece que no tiene traducción.
¿Qué canal es?
Chu. No. Okay, until now nothing was so interesting. No? So you can, I don't regret.
A lot of crashing about, though.
Oh. What about now? Is that okay now?
There's a lot of noise in the background.
Dice que tiene mucho ruido de fondo.
Someone saying hello.
That should be the translator, maybe. Is that the translator?
The translator.
Is that okay? Is this much better?
Maybe we do without.
Is this okay
Yeah,
now?
I can. I translate for you later. I don't know. Okay.
Excuse me, you have to put it like this because the sign, la señal sale de aquí.
Uh-huh.
But it's not working.
No? I don't think so. But maybe there should be
A lot of noise.
We'll help you.
Bueno, hau gertatzen da beti, ez? Azten gea eta traduzioa edo mikrofono bat edo, bueno, berdin du egingo dugu itzulpenari gabe, nik esango diot gero. Zerbait nahi badezue, Arakiz edo Bilok eta Bilok itzulpena egingo dugu. Esaten nuen, ohore handia da, Azkuna zentroarentzat bihar inauguratuko den erakusketa aurkeztea. Margaret Harrison, sexu, klase eta indarkeriaren arteko harremanak. La exposición de Margaret Harrison, que hemos titulado Diálogos entre sexo, clase y violencia, la inauguraremos mañana. Y decía que para Azkuna Zentroa es un honor presentar esta exposición. Se trata de la primera retrospectiva de gran formato que realiza Margaret, pionera en el arte feminista, que luego Xavier os explicará mejor. Podremos ver todo el recorrido de su carrera, incluso una de las piezas más emblemáticas que estaba en la exposición de 1971, que como todos sabéis fue cerrada por la policía. Y a mí me gustaría subrayar que fue cerrada por la policía por la manera en que ella había representado la figura masculina. Y es muy curioso, y además de ser un altavoz importante en ese momento. También quiero decir que Azkuna Zentroa enmarca esta exposición dentro de una defensa que también, de la mano de Xabier Arakistain, hemos hecho de posicionamiento de mujeres artistas, pero no solamente de mujeres artistas, sino de mujeres que en su arte tratan del género y tratan sobre todo desde una perspectiva feminista. De esa manera comenzamos con Guerrilla Girls, que quizá eran la generación más joven. Después hicimos Judy Chicago, que era, digamos, la madre de las Guerrilla Girls. Y Xavier siempre nos decía que teníamos que hacer la mirada británica, que realmente fue la pionera. Bueno, debe haber una gran discusión entre estadounidenses y británicos para saber quién fue la primera. Pero es verdad que Margaret Harrison es la muestra de lo que en toda Gran Bretaña luego se desarrolló como este arte dedicado al género, a la reivindicación del posicionamiento de la mujer en la sociedad y también de la mujer trabajadora y de la explotación de las mujeres. Tiene un contenido social que podréis ver más adelante. Yo solamente quiero recordar dos cosas, que el fin de semana que viene celebramos la 6ª edición del curso de perspectivas feministas en el arte que también se enmarca dentro de toda toda esta estrategia de Azkuna Centro A para defender y poner en valor esas voces de mujeres. También quiero dar las gracias, muy sinceramente, a Margaret. Thank you. Ha sido, la verdad, maravilloso trabajar con ella. Es una persona extraordinaria. Y todo el equipo de Azkuna Centro A, porque yo hablo en nombre de todo el equipo, que han estado ellos mucho más cerca, han estado realmente encantados. No puedo dejar de agradecer a Xavier Arakis, que ha sido el impulsor de toda esta estrategia que ya desde hace 6 años llevamos en Azkuna Centro A. Él va a poder explicar mejor. De todas maneras, en la nota de prensa tienen ustedes toda su trayectoria y todo el trabajo que ha realizado en este ámbito. Y también quiero agradecer a todos los que han colaborado en esta exposición. No ha sido una exposición fácil, es más una exposición de museo. Tiene cantidad de préstamos de lugares que tienen unas exigencias muy particulares, pero todos ellos, tanto la Tate como el British Council o la Galería Prentsaurrekoa, nos han ayudado muchísimo. También están por aquí, pero no las veo, iba a decir sus nombres antes. Hay 3 personas, I don't know where you are, from Goldsmith College. Hay 3 personas, Johanna Hart, Ashley Young y Naz Vallanca, además de Adriana Tranca, que no ha podido venir, que son personas jóvenes que han estado trabajando todo el archivo de Margaret para esta exposición. And we thank you very much. Thank you. Sin más, paso la palabra a Arakis.
Muchas gracias, Lourdes. Muy buenos días a todo el mundo. Si la generación de la madre de Margaret Harrison consiguió el voto para las mujeres, es la generación de Margaret Harrison la que hizo posible que tan solo hace 50 años las mujeres se incorporaran por primera vez de forma masiva y a partir de entonces continua en el campo del arte. Nos olvidamos que tan solo hace 50 años las mujeres no estaban en los museos. No es que estén ahora en un número que haga justicia a la estadística o a la sociología, pero por lo menos tenemos un proceso en el que las mujeres están llegando a los museos, están siendo una voz, no solamente están siendo un objeto representado. Perdón. Como os decía, que las mujeres se estén incorporando de forma continua y masiva a partir de los años 70 en el campo del arte es gracias a la generación de las pioneras como Margaret Harrison, y para mí es un verdadero placer y honor presentar esta exposición. Quiero agradecer sinceramente a Azkuna Centro A y a la directora, a Lourdes Fernández, el entusiasmo con el que ha aceptado siempre las propuestas, tanto la de Gary Lagels como la de Chicago o la de Margaret Harrison, y al equipo, con el que es un estupendo equipo, que es un placer trabajar con todo el mundo. Bueno, Margaret Harrison, como os decía, empieza entre los años finales de los 60 y los 70, una trayectoria en la que, aunando activismo y arte, empiezan a hacer una serie de estrategias que lo que pretenden es llevar el arte a la calle. Y trabajan haciendo performances, etcétera, otro tipo de intervenciones artísticas en movimientos que son impulsados en eventos que son impulsados desde el movimiento feminista, como la ya mítica manifestación contra el Miss World Contest, contra el concurso de belleza Miss Mundo, en el que hicieron una importante intervención. Luego, esa trayectoria se gira al revés y empiezan a llevar la calle al arte. Y aquí es cuando Margaret Harrison hace su primera exposición en una galería en 1971, que, como explicaba Lourdes, solamente duró esa exposición 24 horas porque fue cerrada por la policía por cargos de indecencia. Y, como explicaba Lourdes, era una exposición que miraba críticamente la representación que hace de las mujeres la sociedad de consumo, el capitalismo, pero también el arte pop. Y lo que hizo Margaret Harrison fue aplicar la misma regla, los mismos elementos de representación a los hombres, los mismos elementos de representación que el discurso patriarcal aplicaba a las mujeres, se lo aplicó a los hombres. Revirtió la mirada. Esa es su primera estrategia, la de la mirada revertida. Y, como explicaba Lourdes, causó muchísima conmoción que los hombres fueran presentados, en concreto el recientemente fallecido director de Playboy, Hugh Hefner, fuera representado como una de sus conejitas. No solo cerraron la exposición en 24 horas, sino que además robaron ese dibujo. Lo que podemos ver aquí en un rato cuando se enseña en la exposición es un dibujo que volvió a hacer en 2010, porque aquel dibujo desapareció y nunca se supo cómo. A partir de entonces, el grupo con el que está trabajando Margaret, entre el que se encuentran nombres muy conocidos como Mary Kelly, Kay Hunt, otras personas, empezaron a trabajar ampliando esa mirada invertida y haciendo, si a mí algo que me llama mucho la atención del feminismo británico es la intersección entre el sexo, la categoría de sexo y la categoría de clase social. Entonces, y yo creo que la primera vez que además vi una obra de Margaret físicamente, no en los libros, sino la primera vez que ves una obra físicamente, que fue Homeworkers, es un impacto visual porque consigue, yo creo, aglutinar esas dos categorías y las tensiones que se establecen entre ellas de una forma muy gráfica y muy potente. Entonces, como os decían, empiezan a hacer diferentes estrategias y Margaret forma parte de este grupo. Es, de hecho, una de las 3 artistas de una de las piezas claves del arte británico, que es Women and Work, que es la única pieza que no está en esta exposición y que incorpora en el arte conceptual, lo ensancha, incorpora la categoría la de sexo y clase como un tema a tratar en el arte. A partir de entonces, Margaret sigue una andadura que va ampliando, va deteniéndose en diferentes categorías que van interseccionando con el sexo, como la clase social, la raza y otras, y en las que va desarrollando una mirada que se va ampliando para ofrecer un discurso que se especializa en mostrar lo que esconden las fachadas. Margaret Harrison trata las imágenes cotidianas, las imágenes habituales, como si fueran unas fachadas, o las entiende como fachadas, que tienen todo un andamiaje por detrás, una estructura que las sostiene. Y esta es una de las líneas del estilo de Margaret que yo creo que además se ve inmediatamente. En los últimos años, porque claro, es una retrospectiva de 50 años de trabajo, en los últimos años retomó esa primera estrategia, la mirada revertida, y creo que fue a principios de los 2010, en San Francisco, volvió a hacer una serie de dibujos que citaban, ¿no?, los primeros dibujos de la exposición de 1970, pero el cambio en la recepción fue radical. Si en el 71 lo cerró la policía en 24 horas por indecencia, en 2010, en la Galería del Castro, el mítico barrio gay de San Francisco, fue un terrible éxito, porque en aquel momento ya tanto el movimiento feminista como el movimiento LGTBIQ ya tenía el monto de conocimiento necesario para saber que tanto el sexo como el género y la sexualidad son categorías culturales, que no naturales, y se entendió en 2010 la estrategia de Margaret no solamente como una denuncia de cómo jerarquizamos los sexos en las culturas contemporáneas, sino también como una puerta para ver el abanico de diferentes posibilidades que puede entrañar tanto el sexo como el género, la naturaleza y el sexo, el género, la sexualidad, y las diferentes intersecciones entre esas categorías en la naturaleza humana, ¿no? A partir de ahí empieza a retomar otra vez esta idea de la mirada, se centra en la idea de la mirada, empieza a introducir unos elementos puntuales muy claros, los espejos, que, como siempre me comentaba a veces, solemos comentar la cita de Virginia Woolf, el espejo ha sido uno de los elementos recurrentes en el discurso feminista, porque, como decía, y es una cosa que hemos comentado, en el 29 ya escribía en la habitación propia Virginia Woolf que las mujeres han servido como una suerte de espejo que han reflejado a los hombres al doble de su tamaño real. Esta es una imagen que siempre es una imagen que yo evoca, ¿no?, su última época sobre los espejos. Y ahora que está de moda la palabra interseccionalidad, es un recorrido que podríamos decir que es una mirada interseccional, que va jugando con las diferentes categorías para ampliar una mirada profunda, que es lo que se conoce como la mirada feminista. Esa mirada que es capaz de detener la mirada patriarcal porque es capaz de hacernos ver cómo se está construyendo esa mirada, el carácter sociopolítico del propio acto de mirar. Yo creo que lo más interesante es que teniendo aquí el lujo de que Margaret esté con nosotros, que Margaret haga una presentación de su propia visión de la exposición.
I'm going to take these off. Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. I apologize for not speaking Spanish or Basque. I grew up in a small place in the north of England, which I couldn't even imagine going to London, never mind going abroad, what we called abroad, which was just across the channel to France. So we took no notice of languages. We thought, we're not going to use that. Of course, we have to. But there's also a little bit of that British background of thinking, oh, we don't need to do that. Everybody speaks English. So I do apologize for our attitude. And thank you for visiting the show. And you will see that Javier has done a brilliant job of curating the show. And I think that he's been so thorough. Sometimes I thought he was being too thorough. He kept asking more and more questions. I'm thinking, why does he need to know that? But of course, he didn't know me 50 years ago. So he did need to know these things. But I thank him for putting it together so brilliantly and making me look very good. And I have to say that I hope when you go around the exhibition, you will see that I'm not the hero or the heroine of my work. Other people are the heroes and heroines of the work. But I also want to thank my new friend Lourdes here and all the team who've worked on this. And you'll probably notice that they're women. Fantastic. And also the team who are hanging the exhibition. Some of them are artists, which is also great because they understand what you're talking about. Oh, I have to have it a little bit like this. And they don't get cross with you. They just nod. Yes, I understand. So I also want to thank my friend Raffaella, who stood in for my husband, who became ill just before we left. It's kind of an unusual situation, but both of us worked together in many ways. So he would help me on my work, and I would help him on his work. Usually there's the notion of the woman is sort of pushed to one side. But I need to thank him for this because he actually drove myself and a woman called Alison Fell, a friend of mine, to the Miss World competition. And I had a preformed plastic chest. This is the kind of things you see in underwear departments, with panties and bras. And I strapped it on. It was black. I didn't mean it to be black, but it was black. And it had fur nipples, orange fur nipples on there. And I had a smile on a stick. So we were going to the Miss World competition, and Alison had light bulbs strapped to her chest and a little switch in her sleeve, which she pressed now and again, and they went bedoing, bedoing. Anyway, he actually drove us to the Miss World competition because neither of us could drive, much to our shame. And it was at the Albert Hall. Now, it was actually a really, really creative period because, as Javier said, things were happening on the streets. So in Notting Hill Gate, where I was living, people were, maybe doing performance pieces, or like a friend of mine, she was we didn't call them performance artists then. She was a poet, but she would do things in a local church. And I do remember one piece that she did, and she actually powdered a pig's bottom with black soot. But unfortunately, the pig escaped into the audience, and everybody had to find this pig. So things were happening all the time, and that sort of notion of creativity not being confined to a very sort of rigid space was around at the time. And I remember we were supported very well by a group of gay men, all dressed in wedding dresses. And they sort of trotted out, in their wedding dresses. They looked wonderful, much better than we did. And I remember we were being questioned by a lot of reporters like you guys. And one guy said to us, "You're just protesting because you're ugly." And a friend pushed me to the front and said, "She's not ugly, look." So I sort of went, oh. But I do thank everybody for all the work they've done over the years. I mean, it's been absolutely amazing. I also want to mention a little incident about 10 years ago. A friend of mine was on the phone to the Women's Arts Library, Slide Library, and she heard in the background someone say, do you know where Margaret Harrison is? And the reply came, no, we don't know where she is. I think she's dead. And so here I am, not dead yet. But it is very odd to think that you've lived through a whole part of history. And I'm pleased that in the last few years has finally been a recognition of the contribution of my generation. Because I guess my generation in the British situation, we had access to education because of a thing called the 1947 Education Act. And that opened up education to both women and to working class men and working class women, of course. So a lot of people got into colleges and universities who previously wouldn't have managed it. And I'm a little depressed that the whole political situation has come full circle, and now students in my country are being charged huge amounts of money to go to university. I mean, I don't know how people are going to survive. And I notice, my friends notice who go to give talks in universities, that the art students tend to come from more wealthy backgrounds now because of this change in the Tory policy. So we were the first artists to get through, I guess. But it's also, I think, important to mention that the first international women's exhibition was not in America. Everybody seems to think, it all happened in America. I mean, some of my best friends are Americans, but the first one happened in Berlin. And in 1977. The first international women's exhibition didn't happen in America until 2007. So in between times, there'd been various shows in Holland, and I think in Italy, a couple of other countries, I think. But it ended up, of course, in the biggest one in Los Angeles. Curated by a woman called Connie Butler at the Museum of Contemporary Art. And you will have noticed, particularly in this city, that art production has been a little bit dominated by an American organization. And I think that's a good thing. There are sort of contrasting views on that, but actually has brought attention to the city. And I have noticed in my time here that the city has a really brilliant cultural policy. And it has a parallel with the cultural policy in the 80s of the Greater London Council. The Greater London Council was a Labour council, it was Labour dominated, but they thought culture was important. And they formed a cultural committee, of which my partner was on. And it really, really annoyed another woman. Her name was Margaret Thatcher. And she had to get rid of this council because of its cultural policy, which was all-inclusive. They would have things going on in boroughs like Hackney, which was not thought of a special place, or they had it going on in Peckham, where I lived for a while, which was, it's South London, they don't need to have it. But actually South London is very fashionable now. But at that time, they didn't want that cultural production going on. Now, to talk about that cultural production, Javier mentioned things going on in the street. We were doing things in the street, but then after a while we said, let's bring the street into the gallery, so that it was a saying, out of the gallery into the street. We then said, from the street into the gallery. And everybody was saying, well, why are you doing that? It's not sort of free. And we said, no, but actually the people in the galleries need to know what we're doing and what we're talking about. They probably have the power. I'm not going to keep you much longer. And I think that what we're going to do today is to just talk about specific works, because after all, the exhibition is big and it goes over a whole period of time. But I think Javier has a notion of what we're going to talk about. So if you would like to ask a few questions, and then we'll go around. Okay.
Berak esan du bezala, gure ideia da orain erakusketa bizitatzea, baino lehenago nahi badezue galderaren bat egin. Como ha dicho Margaret, la idea es ir ahora a ver la exposición. Nos pararemos en 5 o 6 piezas claves, pero como ha dicho ella, si queréis hacer alguna pregunta previa al paseo por la exposición, estamos a vuestra disposición.
Hola. A mí me gustaría saber cómo se sintió ella cuando clausuraron la primera exposición a las 24 horas de ser abierta. ¿Qué sintió? ¿Qué sintió ella a la hora de que le cerraran a las 24 horas la primera exposición que hizo?
Well, I was very depressed, as you can imagine. Been working for, over a year on this work. And also, why did they close it down? I couldn't understand it. But of course, I had only been talking to my friends and they knew what I was about, but other people didn't know. So I need to learn that you have to find a way to attract people in. But I was very depressed. The other thing that happened was my partner said to me, you know what, because there was a lot of people banging on the door of our little apartment, and one guy broke a window, and he said, if they don't devalue the pound tomorrow, you're going to be on the front of all the newspapers, including the Daily Mirror and the Daily Mail. And I thought, I think I'm going to be sick. Because I could imagine my mother reading these things and going, because she lived in this small northern place, she would be embarrassed. There was her daughter on the front of these pages. But praise the Lord, they didn't do it. They devalued the pound. That is the only time I've been grateful for the devaluation of the pound.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Bukatzeko... sí, perdón.
Yo quería preguntarle si sabe si a Hugh Hefner le molestó o ha intentado comprarle la obra cuando estaba en vida, o qué le pareció a él.
No, but at the opening of the exhibition, the London club of the Bunny Club, quite a few of them came along. And, I mean, they didn't talk to me. They just, they were around. And when we were closing the exhibition up, I noticed that the Bunny Boy was missing. And I said to the public relations person, well, where's the Bunny Boy? And he said, I know who's got it. And his theory was that they had got it, they'd stolen it to get some attention, but it never surfaced. But later, when I went to work in California, I actually met quite a few women from Hollywood, because there was some meeting in the wineries. There was a lot of film people used to meet up, and I was invited along. And I told them this story, and I said, you know what? one of them said, I know him. I said, okay, well, when you see him, if he's got that drawing, tell him, I don't mind, just give it back. They didn't.
Hola, yo le quería preguntar, bueno, acaba de decir que se sintió deprimida cuando cerraron su primera exposición. ¿Se siente ahora también deprimida cuando después de tantos años de trabajo del feminismo ocurren casos como el de Harvey Weinstein, por ejemplo?
Yeah. It's very depressing, and you will see a piece in the exhibition called Rape, and there's a group of cuttings of a young woman who was raped by, I think, 7 men. I'm not quite sure about whether that was the case, but anyway, there was no pursuance of her case, so she said, well, right, I'm going to go public. Now, that was a very brave thing to do. She went public. But it didn't really improve the situation. So this woman had struggled to actually go public and tell her story. And there are other instances. Actually, I think this is like a little revenge thing that's quite interesting. You will see a tiny little cutting with a red background. And it was a case of a Russian woman. And she'd been raped by 2 men. But what she kept her head, and she invited them back to her apartment and gave them drink and drugs. And when they came to in the morning, she'd castrated them. Now, it's not the answer, but maybe it's okay for Harvey. I don't know, but it's very, very depressing. It cannot have gone on for so long, but it has. And it was sort of normalized. And as some of those women have said, actually, we didn't know, this guy had so much power over us. I mean, he was a huge mogul, probably not now, but was a huge mogul in the film industry. And of course, their careers, their welfare, the way they made their living depended on that. But it's had this domino effect that once one person came out, and I guess because the film industry is so visible, it means it is visible. Whereas when that young woman in the 70s came out public, it wasn't so visible. The film industry wasn't so big. And actually, people weren't looking at that. But at the time, when I did that piece, there was a show to go on of a number of artists, and myself included. My partner's work was thought of unsuitable and taken out. He'd done a thing about thalidomide and the scandal of thalidomide and being connected to the booze company. Which booze company was it? I can't remember. But it had the royal crest on all the bottles. So he sort of he did a print about it and was helped by a reporter, a guy called John Pilger, who's a very, very famous reporter. Anyway, that piece was removed, and then they looked at other works, and they looked at my work, and they said, oh, this is in the Royal Park. It's free for people to go in. We don't want children to know about this thing called rape. We'll move the whole exhibition to the Hayward Gallery, and then people won't notice it because you have to pay to go into the Hayward Gallery. But actually, of course, it attracted more and more attention. Nobody would have bothered. It attracted a lot of attention at the Hayward Gallery. And when I got to it, there was a little rope around it, and there were, lots of people were reading everything. They were sitting on the floor and reading everything. And somebody told me that they'd had a little curtain around it at one point. I mean, how ridiculous. So that attracted quite a lot of attention. So the work had some sort of impact in that it was noticed. And after that, I said to the Arts Council, well, what are you going to do with this? And they said, don't worry, it goes out all the time. it's been asked for all the time. So it would go to different cities in different exhibitions and would get attention on the issue of rape. As I said before, I'm not the hero of my work. The hero of the work are other people.
No, very good. Creo que es una buena frase para terminar. Si os parece, vamos a ver ahora la exposición. Yo solamente... perdón.
Quería hacer una última preguntilla.
Are we doing another one?
No te puedo, sorry.
Oh.
No te había visto, lo siento.
Okay.
Buenos días. Quería preguntarle a ver qué ha sido de esa efervescencia cultural que había en Londres en los años 70 y si el arte feminista ve que tiene relevo.
I mean, I do notice that the artists are turning to issues again. And a lot of women artists, young women artists, are working on some of the kinds of issues that I was working on. But also the breadth of the techniques has much broadened. And so it's not unusual to do performance work. It's not unusual to do film work. For instance, I give you an instance. My partner did a show about a women's strike in the north of England at the ICA in London in 1972, I think. And the ICA asked the Arts Council, would they fund the video? Because he wanted to use video. And the Arts Council said, no, we don't recognize video as an art form. And after the show had closed, everybody had struggled with the money. They came back and said, oh, you'll be pleased. Now we've accepted video as an art form. For God's sake. Anyway, so it has meant that the field has gradually broadened with people taking different sort of ways of working. You'll notice that a lot of my work is painting, but it also has words on it. Now, at the time, you didn't use words, except for groups like Art and Language and the conceptual artists. And there's a group that was around myself and others, we would have fierce arguments because they said, oh, well, this is language, it can't be sold. So, but you will have noticed, actually, it's being sold. But we were talking about a material practice that affected material beings. We recognized you could not say it's not going to be sold. Someone will buy it at some point, or maybe they won't. And if it's okay either way. So I think that the things that students are experiencing and artists are experiencing now have come full circle. The depressing thing is that we used to do what we call squats. We would squat a building, take it over a building, which had been empty for years, and just start putting things up. So lots of different groups like Artist Meeting Space in Covent Garden, where artists could go along and meet each other. There were Artist Placement Group, who I didn't quite get on with because they came from the top down, but they met and they got money to do things from companies. There was the Women's Free Arts Alliance in North London. There's a poster up in there, and it's called the Moon Cow Gallery. That was their gallery. So we could get those spaces. Now, if you go into London now, it's so expensive that I don't know how people exist. So that's very depressing. But on the other hand, I think it's freeing those artists to do, say, as we said. We were told we were the most fortunate and the most unfortunate of artists, and we were. Because we couldn't make any money, then we did what we wanted. So, okay, they don't want to buy it, so we're going to do this stuff. And maybe you don't want it, but we're going to do it anyway. And I think there's a similar thing going on now. But of course, you have to account for the finance of the cities.
Bueno, creo que debemos ir a ver la exposición. Yo solamente dos cosas que no quiero desaprovechar la oportunidad de teneros aquí. Hay un programa de mediación para visitar la exposición, que creo que es interesante que lo subrayemos, los jueves para grupos entre 5 y 25 personas y los viernes para grupos escolares. Y que la exposición, además, estará abierta hasta el 14 de enero. Sin más, thank you very much, Margaret. Perhaps we can go to see the exhibition. Eskerrik asko guztioi eta nahi badezue juten gea erakusketa ikustea Xabier eta Margaretekin.